I'm Bob Waters, part of the Amperage team and moderator for today's discussion. Today we are discussing engaging your board or volunteers and stewarding donors during a crisis. Joining us today are Brian Ernest, Amperage President and CEO, Jennifer Rubel, Amperage Fundraising Advisor, and Melissa Pence, also an Amperage Fundraising Advisor. You know, as states are starting to reopen, things are getting a little more back to normal, but there's still a long way to go and still a lot of economic uncertainty. We want to help you with your mission and hope that today's presentation will help you and your organization to move forward. Now, you'll notice a Q&A tab on your screen there at the bottom. Feel free to go there to submit any questions you may have as we go forward. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can here today. So let's go ahead and start, and I'll start with Brian first off. And Brian, you serve on several boards locally as well as regionally. What have you seen from organizations, both good and bad, in the form of communication?
Yeah, good afternoon, Bob. Good to see you. Yeah, it has been an interesting time for a lot of nonprofits and engaging their board. Certainly a difficult time to communicate with your board differently. You know, a lot of boards historically have pulled their board together for even some of that social interaction, opportunity to bring staff and boards together. And so this is definitely a new way of doing business for a lot of nonprofits. You know, I have seen some interesting things being on several boards. I know those that are most successful, getting regular email updates that are short, concise, bullet points, just quick updates as to how the organization's doing, dollars raised, volunteers engaged, updates about operational issues, anything that's just short, concise, tight. Many of us are working in different circumstances, maybe working from home, working from your dining room table, whatever it might be, and the technology might not be what you're used to having, and certainly all the board packets that used to get sent out. You know, something else I've seen from a lot of boards that I really like is dashboards, things that are a quick, at a glance look at how is the organization performing and doing. I've also appreciated several of the leaders of organizations that I've served on their board have sent out video updates. So the American Cancer Society comes to mind for me. Their CEO will send out regular updates to their volunteers and donors across the country to just talk about where the organization is right now in the midst of the COVID crisis. And certainly we're all getting used to engaging like this over a Zoom conference. And I'm seeing a lot of successful board meetings now being held over Zoom with the opportunity to chat with each other, share our screens, see many faces. And also it cuts down on travel time, which is great, that extra travel time between board meetings.
Yeah, and you know, we're seeing each other on Zoom so much, you know, we forget what each other kind of looks like in person. But Melissa, do you think that it's okay for these meetings to continue on Zoom after the states reopen?
I'd say yes. You know, as you look at people's comfort level and re-entering back into society, and that everyone's comfort level is going to be different. In addition, you still have folks that are serving as caregivers and that maybe aren't normally serving as caregivers during the day, and they may not have childcare available for you to go to attend a meeting. So I think having those options still available increases your participation for those that still want to be involved and engaged within your organization. And I think you'd rather have that participation as opposed to trying to set up a meeting with everybody there in person and maybe have little participation.
Jennifer, talking about donor stewardship, this has, of course, changed how we steward donors during this time. What are the biggest changes we've seen in that area?
I think the biggest changes that we've seen thus far, Bob, first and foremost, are in our ability to have those one-on-one interactions. We got so used to those, and they're so critically important, but in most cases right now, getting together personally wouldn't probably be appropriate. Another change that have seen so far is in the events that we used to hold. Mostly they were fundraising events, but they were also really great opportunities to steward our donors. And we've seen those need to be pushed off into the future, held virtually, or in some cases even canceled.
Yeah, Melissa, we talk about activities during this time. We've talked about the boards. What can a nonprofit do with their volunteers during this time, especially virtually?
I think first off, you got to look at what your needs of your organization are right now. Volunteers want to support and help out where they can. They just don't know how. This is a new reality and the volunteer duties may look different. So you need to look at what you have and be specific with your ask. And I think one of the things that is an example of that is when this pandemic started. You look at the hospitals and there was that shortage of PPE. Well, you had folks that were able to, if they knew that they could sew, and they had some fabric, they bound together and they sewed some masks, and all of the hospitals then had PPE that they could distribute to patients that were coming in and seeking care. And I think as you look at your own organization's reopening efforts, if you've been closed for a while, you may need to look at some of those precautions as well. Well, you need PPE for your employees, clients that come in, and perhaps that's one maybe call to action that you can do. Also, you can see what other things that you may have. A lot of organizations have had to try and take their programs virtual. They may be doing educational programs out in the public and they're trying to avoid that right now. So having volunteers that can be engaged, that can present those programs via a video conferencing system like this, or support group facilitation, even some online tutoring we've seen as examples that you can help engage volunteers in that aspect. Don't be afraid to look at your administrative tasks that need to be done. Are there updates to your database that a volunteer can do from the comfort of their own home? And are there thank you calls? I think that's one of the things, as we look at trying to engage donors at this time and letting them know, pulling together some volunteers that can help make some thank you calls for your donors during this time and let them know how much they appreciate you supporting their organization over the years. And I think one of the things too, if you have volunteers that are hesitant, perhaps, maybe don't feel comfortable gathering items for a food pantry, or if they're not at comfort level to be able to present an online presentation, I think if they're a spiritual person and you know that they are, simply asking them for prayers for the health of your employees, your organization, and your clientele goes a long way too. Volunteers really just want to help. They just want to know how. And I think being able to give some concrete examples and ways that they can help you, they'd be more than happy to help you succeed during this.
And this is a lot of this is just about constant communication. But Jennifer, have you seen a difference between the fundraising during a crisis and then ongoing fundraising efforts, for instance, capital campaigns, that kind of thing?
Well, communicating is always important to an effective fundraising operation, but particularly during a pandemic or crisis that we're dealing with right now. Donors and prospects, as Melissa said, want to help and they want to hear from organizations. And those people will remember who reached out to them during this time to express genuine care and concern for them. What organizations do now will set the stage for their future fundraising success as the crisis begins to subside and we start to recover.
Yeah, is there a large area of opportunity going on at this point? A lot of us look at the news and everything of the economy, tightening, constricting a little bit, but is there an area of opportunity for donor stewardship right now?
I think the biggest area of opportunity that we're seeing at the moment is the shift in giving that we've seen to human needs-based organizations. We've seen a tremendous number of donors want to give to those organizations that support our basic human needs and those of us that are most vulnerable to COVID-19 and its effects.
Brian, right now, what about boards? Some may look at this as an opportunity to increase the size of a board or even decrease, downsize the size of the board. What are you seeing and what do you recommend?
Yeah, boards are in an interesting place right now. You think about the support that a board plays strategically and operationally for a lot of organizations. You have a lot of leadership of nonprofit organizations that are just like us in the for-profit world, are navigating new water. It's a difficult time, and it has been since this pandemic really struck, is that we're rolling right along with a strong economy here in the Midwest, and then suddenly bam, things come to a screeching halt. And so for a lot of leadership, it's navigating things like, PPP loan programs, and should we do layoffs? Should we close our doors? How safe are our volunteers, our guests, whatever it may be. And so, we're seeing engagement in boards, I would say, kind of at a micro level and a macro level. On a micro level, I'm seeing successfully executive directors who are reaching out to board members, maybe one-on-one or in small groups, to help navigate through these difficult times with some personal calls. But then on the other end of the spectrum, reaching out and to a much larger, broader base. I'll throw a shout out to the Gross Cedar Valley, working together with Blackhawk County to do some town hall meetings to really bring leadership in our community together, to talk about some of the issues facing our community. I think it's that engagement that's just critical. And you talk about board size. I guess I'm a firm believer in tough times, whether those are difficult times like now or times when you're really planning to ramp up fundraising, is a great time to increase the size of your board. Certainly lots of advantages to having one more good mind around the table, one more ambassador for the organization, one more fundraiser. I think about the circles of influence that each board member has, whether that's friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, whoever it is that could either give time, talent, or resources to the organization. So perhaps a time, maybe not exponentially, but certainly adding some strategic additions to a board to get through these tough times.
On the same tack, Melissa, you may have board members in certain organizations who don't want to solicit donors right now because they think maybe their organization is not part of a healthcare organization, or not really dealing directly with folks who had COVID-19 or know someone who has. What are your thoughts on what you say to those board members, and whether you should halt any type of fundraising efforts because a certain organization isn't directly related to COVID-19?
First of all, every organization is impacted by this pandemic that is going on right now, whether you've had to shut your doors, whether you have a decrease in volunteers, or you've had to reduce the amount of services that you're providing to the community. So everyone is seeing this impact of all of this right now. The Amperage has actually put together a white paper called Don't Panic During the Pandemic. And what that shows is that even during times of economic downturn, philanthropy sustains and it prevails. And that's one of the things as we look at, as we try to engage donors, and that within our mission, there are some folks out there that are not impacted by this as much as others. And we've seen some of this come through with people donating their stimulus checks to their favorite organization or cause, or even helping some small businesses to help stay afloat during this time. The CARES Act also put in there some incentives for people to continue to donate to charity at this point. And those are some things then that we can help share with our donors as they're looking to support us. I think if you're an organization though that halts your fundraising, whether it's a couple months or 6 months, you're going to lose out because everybody else is still fundraising at this point too. And if you try and start some of those fundraising components back up here in say 6 months, you may have already lost those donors. They may have turned their direction to another organization, or they, may not feel like as if you have the needs as much as maybe another organization does too. So I think it's very critical and important that you continue those fundraising efforts during this time.
Bob, I would add to that. I think it's really critical during this time for organizations to look at their mission and really think about, from a communication standpoint, how to maintain that relevancy. There is no doubt about it, prior to COVID, there was a need for so many needs in our community, whether those were around education, whether they were around poverty and homelessness, whether that was around other healthcare needs beyond COVID. It's right now trying to find your voice of relevancy in this difficult time. But organizations, they still have a strong need, and proving that up, that in today's environment, there is still that need there, and those needs will continue. It was just a few months ago, we were talking about the pandemic of diabetes in our country. we were talking about mental health issues were first and on the forefront of our topics on a daily basis. Those things haven't gone away. If anything, they probably increased more. Those of us all working from home, eating well, and certainly all of us with a little bit of anxiety during these tough times, certainly mental health will continue to be an issue. Those are just a couple of examples, but the need is still out there, and it's about relevancy of those organizations getting their message out.
So Jennifer, what do you see as some strategies that organizations can utilize now to continue their lines of communication and their donor stewardship efforts?
I think now is the opportunity that we have now is time. Maybe time that we didn't have before to reach out to those donors personally, whether via phone or virtually, and talk with them about their situation. Talk with them about what they're most concerned about right now. And we're all at different stages in this process of adjusting. And I think to the extent that nonprofits can be prepared to meet their donors and prospects where they are in their process will benefit them in the long run in soliciting gifts from those people.
Yeah, and Melissa, one of the things that so many nonprofits look forward to every year are the annual events, ones that really bring in a lot of funds to keep operations running. So a lot of those events, unfortunately, are being postponed or canceled. So how do you keep those folks who are part of those events, the committee members, the people who want to participate, how do you keep them engaged and making sure that your organization stays relevant and continue to at least raise some type of funds during this time when these events aren't happening?
That's right. And, communication, again, is key, keeping them up to date about what's going on within your organization. But then one of the things you also want to look at are what are their other talents that they can help contribute to your organization too? And are there other ways that they can help participate that might not be in a form of a special event, but maybe it's helping to open the doors and their networks into others that may be interested in supporting your cause. It also may be having them take a look at what the event may look like for future years. If they are an event volunteer and they love this particular walkathon that they've been helping out at every year, we know that those are going to look different next year, whether they go on, are able to continue to go on. So what are some ways that they can start to help you reimagine what that looks like? What type of food is being served at these, and does that change the theme? How do registration or check-in lines look at this? And your volunteers, they can kind of start to take a look at this. I mean, they're one of those folks that are attending these events, and they're going to want to feel comfortable, and they want to make sure that their peers are also feeling comfortable with all of this too. You can also ask them too, are there ways that they may be comfortable supporting your organization too with their own private fundraiser? Something I just received an invitation for here recently was a brush and barrel event. It's one of those sip wine and paint activities. Well, they're doing a fundraiser for Be the Light of Iowa here at the end of the summer. And, it's an opportunity that the business is providing this as a virtual event. They're inviting people to sip their own wine or beverage of choice while they're learning this instruction. But the fees for that too are supporting the organization. And you can be creative too, just because you're not able to gather in person. There may be some creative ways that you can help support the organizations that you love yet, but maybe in a more creative, inventive type of way.
Well,
there's no doubt about it that in crisis comes opportunity. And I think a lot of organizations will lean on, there will always be entrepreneurial ideas and creativity that comes forward. And whether that be virtual events with online auctions and online giving, and it's just as we're all adapting to technology, so will fundraising, and so will engaging with donors. But also as we think ahead to events, as it becomes more popular to get outside and create some of that social distance, we may see things like walks and runs and bike rides and things like that come back. They may be done differently in smaller groups and different time scales, so that we don't have lots of people together all at once. But there's no doubt about it that ingenuity will come through in difficult times like this, and people will find a way to be more creative in their fundraising.
Bob, there's one thing that I'd like to add, and that there are major leadership gift solicitations that are still possible right now. There are some people and some organizations that haven't been as negatively impacted as others. And I'm working with an organization now that is in discussions for a 6 or 7 figure gift. And that process continues to move forward. And they hope to close that gift within the next 60 days. So those opportunities are still out there in some instances.
So what do you recommend to helping to foster that? Is it just communication, just a matter of asking for a lot of folks?
It can be a matter of asking, certainly, but I think that it's a very individual situation depending on the prospect. This particular prospect wasn't negatively impacted by the crisis, and in some instances may have even benefited from it, just for lack of a better word. And they have an existing relationship with the organization. They trust the organization and they believe in their mission. So they're continuing to soldier on and really want to get this done for this group.
That's great news, and hopefully that so many other folks will be able to have similar things happen in their organizations. But one of the things when a crisis happens is especially when you get to large groups of people who are trying to make a decision on a path forward. And Brian, I'll pose this to you. What do you do about conflicting advice that you may hear from board members, other committee members, community stakeholders? What do you do about conflicting advice and trying to kind of manage your way forward through that?
Yeah, it's a difficult challenge, I think, for any organization that's just trying to figure out how to navigate the current situation. The guidelines from CDC and the states and local departments of health seem to be changing rapidly. And obviously it's something to monitor and to keep an eye on. I think it is difficult for a lot of organizations to look in their crystal ball right now and look at what do I do about a summer event or an early fall event. And I think continuing to take cues from other organizations. I think there's a lot of organizations that don't want to be first out there and possibly stick their neck out a little bit. So it's looking at the successes of other events that are happening. How did they do it well? How did they maintain social distancing? How did they put safety precautions in place? But also just, I think, taking slow and incremental steps. I think avoiding those events that are big, large gatherings in tight spaces, those things. And I'm certainly no health expert, but I think leaning on, here locally, Blackhawk County Health, Lynn County Health, wherever you may be in the state of Iowa or beyond, there are local health officials that are happy to help navigate those situations and give the best guidance that they can in how to move forward with some events and activities.
Thanks, Brian. We've had a question come in through our Q&A feature, and I encourage people to ask any questions that they'd like. We'll try to get to them in the time that we have. But I believe, Melissa, you had talked about the CARES Act and that has encouraged giving to more nonprofits. And one of our folks here who is with us today says, can you please elaborate on that? Can you elaborate on how the CARES Act has encouraged giving to more nonprofits?
Yes, well, last year when tax laws were revised and such, that made it so that some folks were not able to deduct charitable donations because they weren't at a high enough income level and such. Well, the CARES Act this year, what it is, it's allowing individuals, no matter where they are in the income bracket, to deduct $300 if given to a charitable organization. So that is one way. On the corporate level, corporations too are able to deduct a higher percentage than what they previously were able to deduct to help support nonprofit organizations. So those are a couple ways that are encouraging some folks to give to nonprofit organizations at this time. And these are specifically things through the CARES Act for this year, 2020.
Excellent. And of course, there's more talk in Washington and beyond of possibly more legislation that might encourage more giving, we hope. as the economy tries to rebound again. Jennifer, once again, what are the best opportunities that you have for donor stewardship? Especially, I know that you are involved with some capital campaigns right now. What is your thoughts on how to continue those capital campaigns and continuing the momentum rolling forward when this crisis has made it maybe push back a little bit?
One thing I recommend that those organizations that are in a campaign at this moment take some time to look at their gift table. Generally, when campaigns start, there's a gift table of gifts that they think they'll need at various ranges to get to their goal. And this is an opportunity to sort of populate that gift table with those gifts that have already come in. You can also identify any gaps that you have and potentially fill those in with the prospects that you know that you have as potential gifts on that gift table. It's also an opportunity to review the campaign timeline, whether it be 3 years or 5 years. That may need to be extended at this point to meet the donor needs and the prospects' needs. Pledge period, the same thing. That may need to be extended from 3 years to 4 years or whatever it happens to be. I've also been working with an organization who has reached out to some of those donors that have previously given gifts to the campaign and asked them if they would consider making an additional gift for a different naming opportunity or what have you. And they have been successful in a handful of instances getting people to make those gifts and issue them sort of as a challenge grant. That when the campaign does get started again, they'll use those dollars to encourage others to give to the campaign.
Melissa, this is school is what was left of, I guess, school at home classes now. School is let out for the summer. So this, traditionally you may have had certain activities going on that kids can get involved with. So is there a way of engagement or a better engagement during this time to get younger people involved in nonprofit organizations and helping to help get those folks energized and engaged?
Yes, they are. As you had mentioned, this is kind of the week. Some concluded classes last week, some this week, and some the following week. And so there's parents out there that are trying to find activities to, get their young ones active and such, and something with a purpose as well. One of the things that the Indian Creek Nature Center is doing too is, they're usually a site that is bustling with kids, with field trips and that this time of year. And because of social distancing and that, they haven't been able to do so. So they've been providing some of their virtual programming online, not only for the children, but for families too, to partake. And that way they can share their beauty of their center and teach a little bit about nature during that point too. You can also get kids active in collecting items. Now that Goodwill is starting to go back up and open, are there toys and that they may be not playing with anymore that they can donate to another family, or clothing items, even canned food drives too. Those are kind of some simple things that kids can help you do. And then you can help them bring those to the collection site bring your kids to the collection site with you too when you do the drop off, because they'll be able to see what type of an impact that's making.
Excellent. Well, plenty of opportunities. And of course, the key is communication and continuing to have that open dialogue, whether that's with your volunteers or your board members or any other stakeholders that may be part of your nonprofit organization. So that's going to do it for us today. We really appreciate you joining us here for this AMPcast. I want to thank Brian, Jennifer, and Melissa for their insights. And of course, feel free to reach out to us here at Ampridge if you have any further questions or needs during this time. We're here to help, and we know that it's difficult to navigate through sometimes, but we hope to be a resource for you along the way. So again, thanks again for joining us, and be well.